My husband chose his thieving mother over me. What I did next made them both regret it. My mother-in-law has always believed no woman was good enough for her precious son. She made this very clear from the moment my husband and I started dating. She told me I was not good enough for him on multiple occasions, and never missed an opportunity to criticize me. My husband never defended me either. Whenever she and I argued, he would stay quiet and refuse to pick a side. This created a huge rift in our relationship from the start. Something important to know is that my mother-in-law has a history with theft. She was arrested about 20 years ago for stealing around $500 worth of jewelry from a department store. Knowing this, I was always careful not to leave my belongings out when she visited. Over the past year, she started visiting more frequently, about twice a month, usually without any warning. My husband would welcome her with open arms and tell me to start cooking because his mama was here. The visits themselves became less hostile over time. She stopped making comments about my background and stopped trying to convince us of her wild theories. I thought maybe she was finally warming up to me. Then about 6 months ago, I noticed something strange. After one of her visits, I went to do my skincare routine and realized one of my expensive creams was missing. I searched everywhere but could not find it. I did not suspect her at first. The next time she visited, another cream went missing. Then my empty AirPod case disappeared from my drawer. That is when I started connecting the dots. I told my husband about my suspicions, and he immediately shut me down. He called me irresponsible and said I probably misplaced everything. We argued about it and did not speak for days. I knew something was off, so I ordered 2 small cameras and placed one in the bathroom and one in our bedroom without telling anyone. My only goal was to confirm my suspicions. The next time she visited, I watched the footage, and there she was. She went straight to my bedroom drawer and took a pair of earrings from my jewelry box. She was getting bolder. I wanted to confront her right then, but I stopped myself. I had a better idea. I decided to keep recording and collecting evidence over time. Every single visit for the next several months, I caught her stealing something. She took more skincare products. She took a bracelet. Then she took something that crossed a major line. She stole my watch. This was an expensive piece I only wore a few times a year, and she knew that. She clearly thought I would not notice for months, and by then there would be no way to trace it back to her. After 8 months, I had recorded 7 separate instances of her stealing from me. The total value was around $2,500. I gathered all the footage and went to the police station without telling anyone. I did not tell my husband or any family members because I knew it would get back to her. I also worried my husband would take her side like he always did. I filed the report and she was arrested shortly after. The police found everything in her house. She was not even trying to sell the items. The skincare creams were almost empty. The watch had clearly been worn. The AirPod case was dirty. She was using my things like they belonged to her. After her arrest, she called my husband immediately. He came home in a panic and started screaming at me. He called me an evil monster and said I had destroyed his family. He told me he was going to bail her out right now and demanded I drop the charges immediately. Then he said 2 words that changed everything. He said, "or else." I looked at him and told him very calmly that if he bailed her out, we were done. He stared at me for a moment and then grabbed his keys and walked out the door. He drove to the station and bailed her out. He stayed at her house that night. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls from his family. His aunts and uncles were calling me horrible names and telling me I had torn the family apart. His sister sent me a long message saying I should be ashamed of myself for doing this to an old woman. Not a single person asked me what she had done to deserve it. Not one person wanted to hear my side. My husband finally called me that afternoon. He told me his mother was devastated and that I needed to fix this. He said if I dropped the charges and apologized to her publicly, he would consider coming home. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. He asked me what was so funny and I told him to check his email. I had already sent him the footage. All 7 clips. Every single thing his mother stole caught on camera clear as day. The line went silent. Then I told him one more thing. I told him I had been to see a lawyer that morning, and what I found out about our assets made his mother's arrest look like a small problem. He tried to say something, but I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with papers spread across every inch of the surface. The financial documents Marcella requested covered everything from credit card statements to bank records. My hands moved through the stack slowly at first. Then I found something that made me stop breathing. 3 credit card accounts I never opened. 3 cards in both our names that I knew nothing about. I pulled each statement closer and added up the balances in my head. $47,000. The number felt impossible. I read through the charges and saw restaurants I never went to, hotels in cities I never visited, cash advances taken out over and over again. My phone sat next to me and I grabbed it with shaking fingers. Marcella answered on the second ring. I told her what I found and she went quiet for a moment. Then she spoke in that calm attorney voice that somehow made me feel less like I was drowning. She told me to photograph everything right now. Every single page, every statement. Do not let him know I discovered this. She explained something about dissipation of marital assets, and how this would strengthen my case significantly. I barely heard the legal terms because my brain kept circling back to that number. $47,000 he spent without telling me. I hung up and started taking pictures with my phone. Each photo felt like evidence of a crime. After I finished, I went straight to my laptop and logged into our bank accounts. 6 hours disappeared while I went through every transaction from the past 2 years. I found withdrawals from our joint savings that I never made. Small amounts at first. 200 here, 300 there, always just under some threshold that would trigger a notification. I started a spreadsheet and tracked every single withdrawal. The total came to $18,000 taken in tiny pieces over 8 months. He had been stealing from me slowly and carefully, making sure I would not notice until it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text from Joanne asking if I was okay. I typed back that I needed help and could she come over. She replied immediately that she was leaving now. I kept working through documents until I heard her car in the driveway. She walked in and found me sitting in a nest of printed bank statements with tears running down my face. She did not ask questions right away. She just went to the kitchen and made tea. Then she sat down next to me and helped me organize everything into folders while I explained what I found. The credit cards, the missing money, the pattern of theft that went back years. She listened and sorted papers and told me I was doing the right thing by documenting everything. My husband started calling around 8 that night. The first call I ignored, then the second. By the time he hit 17 missed calls, I turned my phone to silent. Joanne stayed over and we set up the guest room for her. Around midnight, we heard his car pull into the driveway. The front door opened and closed. His footsteps went up the stairs. He tried my bedroom door and found it locked. I heard him stand there for a minute before walking to the guest room. Joanne and I did not speak. We just listened to him moving around the house like a stranger. Morning came too fast. I got dressed and went downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table. He looked exhausted and angry at the same time. His eyes had dark circles under them and his hair stuck up in weird directions. He stood up when he saw me and started talking immediately. Why did I send him those videos? Why was I ignoring his calls? He acted like I had done something wrong to him. Like I was the problem in this situation. His voice got louder with each question and I just stood there letting him talk. When he finally stopped, I spoke very calmly. I told him I wanted him to leave the house today. Then I picked up the credit card statements from the counter where I left them and slid them across the table. His face went completely white. All the color drained out like someone pulled a plug. He picked up the top statement and his hands started shaking. He looked at the second one, then the third. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He finally found his voice and tried to explain. His mother needed money for legal fees. She had medical bills. He was just helping family. The words came out fast and desperate. I waited until he finished and then I pointed out what he actually did. He stole from our joint accounts. He opened fraudulent credit cards in my name. He took money that belonged to both of us and gave it to his thieving mother. That made him a thief just like her. I said each word slowly, so he would understand exactly what I meant. His face changed from white to red. He got angry and told me I was being dramatic. Married couples share finances, so it was not really stealing. He kept talking about how I was overreacting and blowing things out of proportion. Joanne walked into the kitchen right at that moment. She looked at him and told him he had 2 hours to pack his essentials and get out of this house. Her voice did not shake at all. My husband looked shocked that Joanne was there. He tried to argue with her, told her this was between him and his wife. She pulled out her phone and held it up. She said very clearly that she was calling the police if he was not gone in 2 hours. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I did not say anything. He turned and stormed upstairs. We heard him throwing things into suitcases, drawers slamming, closet doors banging, the sounds of him packing up his life and leaving. My phone rang while he was still upstairs throwing things around. I saw Marcella's name on the screen and stepped into the living room to answer. She told me the prosecutor was moving forward with the case against my mother-in-law. The evidence was too clear to ignore. Then she said something that made my chest feel tight. They found additional stolen items at her house that matched other police reports from the neighborhood. She had been stealing from multiple people for months, maybe years. I thanked Marcella and hung up just as I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He came down carrying 3 suitcases, one in each hand and one tucked under his arm. He stopped in the doorway and looked at me with this expression I had never seen before. Pure hate. He opened his mouth and told me I was going to regret this. His voice was cold and flat. I walked over to the table where I left the envelope Marcella gave me that morning and picked it up. I held it out to him without saying anything. He set down 2 of the suitcases and took the envelope from my hand. I watched him open it and pull out the papers inside. It was a formal letter from Marcella stating that I was filing for divorce, and he was not to return to the house or contact me except through lawyers. His eyes moved across the page and I could see his jaw getting tighter with each line he read. When he finished, he looked up at me and his hands started shaking. Not the nervous kind of shaking, the angry kind. He called me vindictive. He said I was destroying his family over a few borrowed items. Those were his exact words. Borrowed items. Like his mother had asked permission and planned to return everything. He kept talking about how I was overreacting and making everything worse than it needed to be. He refused to say the word stealing. He refused to acknowledge what she actually did. He also refused to acknowledge the $47,000 in fraudulent credit cards or the money he took from our accounts. He just kept saying I was tearing the family apart. I did not argue with him. I did not defend myself. I just stood there and waited for him to finish. When he finally stopped talking, I told him Joanne was calling the police if he was not gone in 5 minutes. He grabbed his suitcases and walked out the front door. He did not slam it. He just pulled it closed behind him very carefully, like he was trying to maintain some kind of dignity. I watched through the window as he loaded everything into his car. Joanne came and stood next to me. We both watched him drive away. After his car disappeared down the street, Joanne pulled out a bag from the hardware store. She bought new locks for all the doors while I was meeting with Marcella. We spent the next hour changing them. She showed me how to use the drill, and I helped her line up the new deadbolts. When we finished, I called the security company and updated all the access codes. The person on the phone asked if I wanted to add any new emergency contacts, and I gave them Joanne's number. I felt relieved and scared at the same time. Relieved that he was gone and could not just walk back in whenever he wanted. Scared about what would happen next and how bad this would get before it was over. That afternoon, I drove to Marcella's office for our scheduled meeting. She had a corner office on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. The waiting room had nice furniture and art on the walls. Her assistant told me to go right in. Marcella was sitting behind her desk reviewing papers when I walked in. She looked up and smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that said she knew this was going to be difficult, but we would get through it. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and I sat down. She spent the next 40 minutes explaining the divorce process in detail. She used words I did not fully understand at first, like discovery and deposition and marital assets. She drew diagrams on a notepad to show me how the timeline would work. She explained that given the financial fraud and his choice to bail out his mother after my ultimatum, I had a very strong case for fault-based divorce. She said the judge would likely be sympathetic to my position, especially with all the documented evidence. She asked me questions about our finances and our property and how long we had been married. I answered everything as clearly as I could, but my head was spinning. When we finished going through the process, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me seriously. She told me I needed to freeze all joint accounts immediately. She said I should open new individual accounts at a different bank, not just a different branch of the same bank. She also suggested I get a credit monitoring service to make sure he did not open any more fraudulent accounts in my name. She said people do desperate things during divorces and I needed to protect myself financially. I wrote down everything she told me to do. She gave me a list of banks and credit monitoring services she recommended. Before I left, she reminded me not to communicate with him directly about anything. Everything had to go through the lawyers now. I went straight to a new bank after leaving her office and opened a checking and savings account. The banker asked if I wanted to add anyone else to the accounts, and I said no, just me. I transferred half of what was left in our joint savings before I froze the account. Marcella said I was entitled to half and I should take it before he tried to drain everything. The banker helped me set up the credit monitoring service too. She was patient and explained how it worked and what alerts I would get. When I finished at the bank, I sat in my car for a few minutes just breathing. Everything felt surreal. 2 days ago, I was married and living in my house with my husband. Now I was changing locks and opening separate bank accounts and meeting with divorce lawyers. Over the next 2 days, my phone exploded with messages from his family. His aunts and uncles and cousins all had my number and they used it. They called me every horrible name imaginable. His Aunt Teresa started a group chat specifically to harass me. She added 12 family members to it and they all took turns sending me messages about what a terrible person I was. They said I destroyed the family. They said his mother was a sweet old lady who made a mistake. They said I was cruel and heartless for pressing charges. His cousins started posting things on social media. They did not use my name, but it was obvious who they were talking about. Vague posts about family loyalty and forgiveness and how some people care more about material things than relationships. I screenshot every single message, every text and every social media post and every voicemail. I created a folder on my computer and saved everything with dates and times. Then I forwarded it all to Marcella. She called me back within an hour. She said this behavior actually helped our case. She said it showed a pattern of harassment and intimidation. She was already drafting cease and desist letters to send to the family members who were most aggressive. She told me not to respond to any of them. Not a single message. Just keep documenting everything and sending it to her. 3 days after I filed for divorce, Marcella called me with news. My husband's lawyer, Conrad Pennington, had contacted her trying to negotiate a quick settlement. She said Conrad suggested we divide assets 50-50 and both walk away. No fault divorce. Clean break. She laughed when she told me this. She said it was obvious they were hoping I would not pursue the credit card fraud issue. They wanted to settle fast before I could dig deeper into the finances. Marcella told Conrad we were rejecting the offer completely. She had already filed motions to freeze all marital assets and require a full forensic accounting of our finances. She said we were not settling for anything less than what I deserved, and what I deserved was a lot more than half after what he did. She sounded almost excited when she talked about the forensic accounting. She said once we got a professional to review everything, we would probably find even more financial misconduct. I felt something shift inside me when she said that. I realized I was not just protecting myself anymore. I was making sure he faced real consequences for everything he did. I walked back into my office building on Monday morning after 3 days away, and everything looked different somehow. The familiar lobby felt strange. My badge scanned at the security gate, and I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor where my desk waited. When I stepped through the glass doors into the open workspace, several of my coworkers looked up. Sarah from accounting came over immediately and touched my arm. She asked if I was okay because she heard I was dealing with some personal stuff. I told her very briefly that I was going through a divorce and needed to handle some legal things. She nodded and said she was sorry, and if I needed anything to just ask. 2 other coworkers stopped by my desk throughout the morning with similar messages. Nobody asked for details, and I was grateful for that. Around 11, my boss Angela knocked on the frame of my cubicle and asked if I could come to her office for a minute. My stomach dropped because I worried she was upset about the time off, but when I sat down across from her, she smiled gently. She said she wanted me to know the company was supportive during difficult personal situations. She told me if I needed flexible scheduling for legal appointments or court dates, to just let her know in advance and we would work it out. I thanked her and felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. At least my job was secure while everything else fell apart. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was reviewing a contract, and I saw it was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Detective Bryce Thornton from the police department. My heart started beating faster. He said he was calling about my mother-in-law's case and wanted to update me on the proceedings. She had rejected the plea deal the prosecutor offered her. Her attorney apparently planned to argue at trial that she had permission to take my belongings. I actually laughed out loud at that and apologized immediately. Detective Thornton said he understood my reaction because the video evidence made that defense completely ridiculous. He explained the case was now scheduled for trial in about 3 months, and I would need to testify. He said the prosecutor would contact me soon to prepare, but he wanted me to know the evidence was very strong. After I hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen for several minutes. The idea that she would claim I gave her permission was so absurd I couldn't process it. I had video of her sneaking into my bedroom and taking things from my drawers when she thought nobody was watching. Saturday afternoon, Joanne picked me up and drove us to a restaurant across town that I had never been to before. She said we needed to get out and do something normal. We got a table by the window and ordered appetizers and drinks. Joanne looked at me seriously and made me promise not to isolate myself during this whole process. She reminded me that I had friends and family who supported me even though my husband's family had completely turned against me. She said isolation was what abusers wanted and I couldn't give them that satisfaction. I promised her I would try to stay connected and not shut everyone out. We spent the rest of dinner talking about her job and her kids, and normal things that had nothing to do with divorce or theft or legal proceedings. For a few hours, I almost felt like a regular person again. The following Tuesday, I found a large envelope in my mailbox when I got home from work. The return address showed it was from Conrad Pennington's law office. I opened it carefully and found a formal discovery request asking for copies of the videos I had shown my husband. There were other requests, too, for financial documents and communication records. I immediately texted Marcella a photo of the documents. She called me back within 20 minutes and said this was completely expected. She told me we would comply with everything, but only through proper legal channels. She explained it was important to maintain chain of custody for the videos, since they were also evidence in the criminal case against my mother-in-law. She said she would handle all the responses, and I should just forward her any other legal documents that arrived. She sounded calm and professional, and that helped me feel less anxious about the whole thing. 3 days later, Marcella called me with news about the forensic accountant she had hired. He finished his initial review of our financial records, and found even more problems than I had discovered on my own. My husband had been transferring money to his mother's accounts for the past 3 years. The total amount was $32,000. All of it done without my knowledge or permission. Some transfers were labeled as loans, but there was no documentation and no repayment. Other transfers had vague descriptions like family assistance or emergency help. Marcella said this was clear evidence of financial misconduct during the marriage. She explained that in our state, this kind of behavior could affect how assets were divided in the divorce. She was already drafting an emergency motion to prevent him from accessing any remaining joint funds. She sounded almost excited when she talked about it. The judge granted Marcella's emergency motion the very next day. I got the notification through email from her office. All joint accounts were now frozen, and my husband couldn't access them without court approval. Marcella said the judge was clearly not impressed with his financial behavior. She attached a copy of the order which laid out very specifically that he had engaged in financial deception and misconduct. Reading those words in an official court document felt validating in a way I hadn't expected. Someone in authority was acknowledging that what he did was wrong. 2 days after that, I was walking to my car in the parking lot after work when I heard someone calling my name. I turned around and there was my husband walking quickly toward me from across the lot. My whole body went cold. He started saying he needed to talk to me and we had to figure this out. I backed toward the building and told him he wasn't supposed to contact me. He kept walking closer, saying this was ridiculous and we were still married and he had a right to talk to his wife. I pulled out my phone and called building security. Within minutes, 2 security guards came out and I explained there was a legal order for no direct contact. They asked him to leave immediately. He started yelling at me across the parking lot that I was ruining his life and destroying his family. The guards escorted him off the property while he kept shouting. I stood there shaking and one of the guards stayed with me until I got in my car. That evening, I went straight to Marcella's office and told her what happened. She immediately started drafting a restraining order petition based on the workplace incident and the continued harassment from his family. She said showing up at my workplace after being told to only communicate through attorneys was serious. We filed the petition that night and the temporary restraining order was granted within 24 hours. The order prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of me or my workplace. Marcella said violations of restraining orders were taken very seriously, and if he tried anything else, he could face criminal charges. The next week, Conrad contacted Marcella with another settlement offer. This one was slightly better than the first attempt, but still assumed I would accept responsibility for half of the fraudulent debt my husband created. Marcella called me and we discussed it for about 30 minutes. She said the offer was insulting given everything we now knew about his financial misconduct. She responded to Conrad with our counter-demand that my husband accept full responsibility for all debts he created without my knowledge. She also demanded he cover my legal fees since his behavior necessitated the divorce. She told me Conrad sounded frustrated when she laid out our position, but that was his problem, not ours. 2 weeks after I filed for divorce, the preliminary hearing arrived. I sat in the courthouse waiting room with Marcella reviewing documents until they called our case. Walking into the courtroom felt surreal. My husband sat at a table on the other side with Conrad beside him. He wore a suit I had never seen before, and his hair was cut shorter than usual. He wouldn't look at me the entire time. The judge reviewed the initial filings and the emergency motions. She asked both attorneys to summarize their positions. Marcella laid out the evidence of theft and financial fraud very clearly. Conrad tried to argue that this was just a marital dispute being blown out of proportion. The judge looked unimpressed with that argument. She pulled out a thick folder and started going through the evidence piece by piece. The video clips played on a screen mounted to the wall, and I watched my mother-in-law steal from me 7 separate times. The judge asked Marcella questions about the timeline and the total value of items taken. She explained everything clearly and showed the police report listing every recovered item. Conrad tried to interrupt several times, but the judge held up her hand and told him to wait his turn. When Marcella finished, the judge turned to Conrad and asked what his client had to say about the financial records. He fumbled through some papers and tried to claim my husband was just helping his elderly mother with expenses. The judge looked at the credit card statements showing $47,000 in debt and asked why none of this was disclosed to me. Conrad said something about marital finances being complicated, but his voice sounded weak. The judge cut him off and said this looked like clear financial misconduct regardless of his explanations. She reviewed the withdrawal records showing $18,000 taken from our joint savings in small amounts. She asked my husband directly if he thought this was acceptable behavior in a marriage. He stared at the table and mumbled something I couldn't hear. The judge told him to speak up and he said he was just taking care of his mother. She shook her head and said, "Taking care of family doesn't mean stealing from your spouse." Then she granted me exclusive use of the marital home until the divorce was finalized. Conrad tried to object, but she said the evidence of financial fraud made it clear I needed protection of assets. My husband's face turned red and he started to stand up, but Conrad grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. The judge said she was also ordering a full forensic accounting of all marital assets and debts. She wanted a complete picture of where money went over the past 3 years. Marcella thanked her and we gathered our papers and left the courtroom. I could feel my husband staring at me as we walked out, but I didn't look back. The harassment started that same afternoon. His sister called me 12 times in 2 hours, leaving messages that got progressively nastier. His aunt started a group text thread with me included and sent hundreds of messages calling me terrible names. They said I was tearing the family apart and destroying an innocent old woman. I blocked most of the numbers, but they kept finding new ways to contact me. Then 2 days later, I checked my work email and found 3 long messages from my mother-in-law. I have no idea how she got my work address since I never gave it to her. The first message was 5 paragraphs about what a horrible person I was. She said I had always been jealous of her relationship with her son. The second message accused me of planting evidence and setting her up. The third message threatened to sue me for emotional distress and defamation. I printed all 3 emails immediately and called Marcella. She told me to forward everything to her, and also send copies to Detective Thornton. I spent the next hour forwarding dozens of harassing messages from various family members. Marcella called me back that evening and said this was actually helpful for our case. The more they harassed me, the more it showed their true character. She also said my mother-in-law sending those emails was incredibly stupid. Marcella explained that my mother-in-law was currently out on bail for theft charges. One of her bail conditions was no contact with me whatsoever. By sending me those work emails, she violated her bail agreement. Marcella said she was going to contact the prosecutor immediately and file a motion to revoke bail. She explained that witness intimidation while out on bail was taken very seriously by judges. The prosecutor agreed with Marcella and filed the motion the next morning. I got a call from Detective Thornton 2 days later telling me my mother-in-law had been arrested again. This time the judge set bail much higher because she proved she couldn't follow court orders. My husband's family lost their minds when they found out. His sister left me a voicemail screaming that I was evil and vindictive. His mother's friends started posting about me on social media without using my name, but making it obvious who they meant. I documented everything and sent it all to Marcella. Despite all the anger directed at me, I felt relief knowing my mother-in-law couldn't harass me from jail. She would have to stay there until her trial unless someone came up with a lot more money for bail. 3 weeks after the hearing, the forensic accountant finished his complete report. Marcella called me to her office to go over the findings. I sat across from her desk while she explained what he discovered. My husband had been systematically taking money from our accounts for years. The credit cards were just the most obvious part. He also made cash withdrawals, transferred money to his mother's accounts, and paid her bills directly from our joint checking. The accountant traced every transaction going back 3 years. The total amount my husband diverted without my knowledge was $63,000. That included the credit card debt, the savings withdrawals, the direct transfers and payments made on her behalf. I felt sick looking at the numbers laid out in black and white. Marcella said this report was going to change everything in the divorce case. She planned to argue that I deserved a much larger share of remaining assets as compensation for his financial misconduct. The evidence was too clear for any judge to ignore. My husband had been stealing from me for years to support his mother, and I never had any idea. Marcella filed motions with the court requesting a 60-40 asset split in my favor. She attached the forensic accountant's full report showing every fraudulent transaction. She also requested that my husband be held responsible for all the debt he created without my knowledge. The judge would make the final decision, but Marcella felt confident given how clear the evidence was. She said judges don't look kindly on spouses who hide major financial decisions and rack up secret debt. The hearing for these motions was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I tried to focus on work and taking care of myself. The constant harassment from his family was exhausting, but I kept blocking numbers and documenting everything. Marcella assured me their behavior was only helping our case by showing their true character. I decided I needed professional help processing everything that happened. I found a therapist who specialized in divorce and family conflict. Her office was in a quiet building downtown, and I started seeing her twice a week. During our first session, I told her the whole story from beginning to end. She listened without interrupting and took notes occasionally. When I finished, she said something that hit me hard. She told me my husband's behavior showed who he really was all along. I just kept making excuses for him because I wanted to believe he would change. She said I had been hoping he would stand up for me eventually, but he never did. Not when his mother criticized me. Not when she stole from me. Not even when faced with clear evidence of her crimes. He chose her every single time, and I kept giving him chances. The therapy sessions helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for his choices. I didn't make him steal money or bail out his mother. Those were his decisions that showed his true priorities. I started feeling less guilty about the divorce and more confident that I made the right choice. 6 weeks after the forensic report was filed, I got a call from the prosecutor handling my mother-in-law's criminal case. She told me the trial date was set for 3 months out. She explained that I would need to testify about discovering the thefts and installing the cameras. She said the defense attorney would try to make me look vindictive, but the video evidence was too clear for that strategy to work. I asked if I should be worried about testifying, and she said no. The videos showed everything, and there was no way to explain away my mother-in-law taking my belongings 7 separate times. Detective Thornton called me later that same day to check in. He said the case was straightforward and I shouldn't stress about the trial. The evidence spoke for itself, and the prosecutor was good at her job. He reminded me that they found all the stolen items in her house, and many were clearly used. There was no reasonable explanation for why she had my things if she didn't steal them. Conrad contacted Marcella again with a new settlement offer. This was his 3rd attempt at negotiation. Marcella called me and read the offer over the phone. This time Conrad acknowledged the financial wrongdoing. He offered to have my husband accept full responsibility for all the fraudulent debts. He also proposed a 60-40 asset split in my favor. Marcella said this was a significant improvement from his previous offers. She thought Conrad finally realized they had no good defense against the forensic evidence. The numbers didn't lie, and no judge would believe my husband's claims about just helping family. I asked Marcella what she thought I should do. She said we needed to discuss it carefully before making any decision. We met at her office the next afternoon to review the settlement offer in detail. Marcella laid out all the documents on her conference table. She explained that accepting this offer would end the divorce much faster. If we rejected it and went to full trial, I might get a slightly better split. But she said a trial would take at least 6 more months and cost more in legal fees. She walked me through the math showing what I would receive under the settlement versus what I might get from trial. The difference wasn't huge when you factored in the additional time and legal costs. I asked her what she would do in my position. She said that was a personal decision only I could make. Some clients wanted to fight for every dollar on principle. Others wanted closure and to move forward with their lives as quickly as possible. I thought about it for a long time while Marcella waited patiently. I realized I didn't want to spend 6 more months fighting with my husband through lawyers. I wanted this finished, so I could start rebuilding my life. I told Marcella I would accept the settlement offer. She nodded and said she would contact Conrad to finalize the terms. The next 2 weeks were filled with paperwork. Marcella called me almost daily with updates about forms being filed and documents being processed. The divorce moved faster than I expected because we had the settlement agreement already signed and notarized. She told me the judge would review everything and sign the final decree within 30 days if there were no complications. I asked if there could be complications, and she said no. Everything was straightforward now that my husband accepted responsibility for the fraudulent debts and agreed to the asset split. I spent those weeks cleaning out closets and removing anything that reminded me of him. I donated his old clothes he left behind and threw away photos where his mother appeared. Joanne helped me pack up wedding gifts from his family, and I shipped them back with no return address. She laughed when I told her what I did and said his relatives probably deserved worse. The divorce became final on a Tuesday morning in late September. Marcella called me at work to tell me the judge signed the decree and it was officially over. I thanked her for everything she did, and she said I made her job easy by documenting everything so thoroughly. I went to lunch alone that day and sat in my car feeling this huge weight lift off my shoulders. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Joanne asking how I felt, but I needed a few minutes to just sit with it. That evening, Joanne came over with wine, and we sat on my back porch talking about what came next. She asked if I felt sad at all, and I said no. I felt relieved and free and ready to figure out who I was without constantly managing his mother's hostility. 2 weeks after the divorce finalized, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. They told me my mother-in-law's trial was scheduled for the first week of October and I needed to testify. I felt nervous about seeing her again, but Detective Thornton called me the next day to walk me through what would happen. He said I would testify about discovering the thefts and installing the cameras. The prosecutor would show the jury all 7 videos, and I would confirm when each theft occurred. He told me the defense attorney would try to make me look bad, but the evidence was too clear for that to work. The trial started on a Monday morning, and I wore a simple black dress and kept my hair pulled back. I sat in the witness waiting room until they called me, and my hands shook the whole time. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw my mother-in-law sitting at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered. My ex-husband sat in the gallery behind her, and he stared at me with pure hatred in his eyes. I ignored him completely and focused on the prosecutor, who smiled at me reassuringly. I took the oath and sat down in the witness box. The prosecutor asked me to explain how I discovered items were missing and why I installed the cameras. I told the jury everything in a calm, clear voice about the missing skincare products and the AirPod case, and finally my expensive watch. I explained that I installed cameras because my husband refused to believe me when I said his mother was stealing. The prosecutor played all 7 videos on a large screen and asked me to confirm the dates and identify the items being stolen in each clip. Watching those videos again in front of a jury felt surreal. There was my mother-in-law on camera going through my drawers and taking my belongings like she had every right to them. The jury watched silently, and I saw several of them shaking their heads. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination and asked if I had ever given my mother-in-law permission to borrow anything. I said no. He asked if we had a hostile relationship, and I said yes, because she told me repeatedly I wasn't good enough for her son. He tried to suggest I set her up because I didn't like her, but I stayed calm and pointed out that she had a theft conviction from 20 years ago. The prosecutor objected and the judge sustained it, but the jury heard what I said. After I finished testifying, I was allowed to stay and watch the rest of the trial. My mother-in-law took the stand the next day and claimed she thought I had given her permission to borrow things. The prosecutor asked her why she never returned anything and why she hid the items in her house. She stumbled over her answers and started crying, saying I had always hated her and wanted to destroy her relationship with her son. The prosecutor showed the jury that the skincare products were almost empty, and my watch had been worn multiple times. He asked how borrowing something worked if you used it all up and never planned to return it. She had no good answer. The jury went out to deliberate on Wednesday afternoon. I sat in the hallway with Joanne, who took the day off work to be there with me. We waited for less than 3 hours before the bailiff called us back in. The jury found my mother-in-law guilty on all counts. She started sobbing loudly, and my ex-husband jumped up yelling that this was all my fault. The judge threatened to hold him in contempt, and he sat back down. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The judge sentenced my mother-in-law to 18 months in jail and ordered her to pay full restitution for everything she stole from me and from other victims in the neighborhood. Apparently, the police found items belonging to 3 other neighbors when they searched her house. The judge said she showed no remorse and clearly felt entitled to take whatever she wanted. My ex-husband glared at me from across the courtroom like I personally put her in jail instead of her own actions. I walked out of the courthouse that day, and Joanne was waiting for me on the steps. We went to lunch at this little cafe I loved, and she ordered champagne even though it was noon on a Thursday. She raised her glass and said, "Here's to justice and new beginnings." I clinked my glass against hers and felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. Over the next few weeks, I started redecorating my house to make it feel like mine. I painted the bedroom a soft blue color I always wanted, and bought new bedding that didn't remind me of him. I replaced the couch we picked out together with one I chose myself. Joanne helped me hang new artwork, and we rearranged furniture until everything felt different. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. Sarah and Michelle came over for dinner one Friday, and we talked for hours about everything that happened. They both admitted they never liked how my husband treated me, but didn't know how to say anything. Sarah said she noticed I always seemed anxious when his mother visited, and she wished she had spoken up. I told them it wasn't their fault, and I was just glad to have them back in my life. My ex-husband's family kept posting things on social media about ungrateful daughters-in-law and how some people destroy families. I blocked every single one of them and refused to engage. Marcella told me unless they directly contacted me again, it was better to just let it go. A letter arrived from the restitution office about 6 weeks after the sentencing. It said my mother-in-law started making payments from jail through her work program. The amount was only $40 a month, but seeing that first payment felt validating. She was actually being held accountable for what she did, even if the payments were small. 3 months after the divorce finalized, I woke up one Saturday morning and realized I felt genuinely happy. I wasn't anxious about unexpected visits or walking on eggshells trying to avoid conflict. I could do whatever I wanted in my own house without worrying about criticism or judgment. I made coffee and sat on my back porch watching the sunrise and felt this deep sense of peace. Joanne called me that afternoon and said she thought I was ready to start dating again. I laughed and said I didn't know about that, but she insisted I should at least try. She helped me set up a profile on a dating app, and I started talking to a few people. It felt strange at first, but also good to meet people who treated me with basic respect. I went on a few casual dates and wasn't looking for anything serious, but I enjoyed getting to know new people who had no connection to my past. I spent the next 18 months working through my finances piece by piece. Every month I made payments on the debts that were actually mine, and watched my credit score slowly climb back up. The forensic accountant's report sat in my filing cabinet like a shield, protecting me from any claims that I should pay for what my ex did. The bank tried to come after me for one of the fraudulent credit cards, but I sent them copies of the report and the divorce decree. They dropped it within 2 weeks. I opened a savings account and started putting money away again, something I couldn't do for years while my ex was draining everything. Watching that balance grow felt better than I expected. I found a legal aid organization through a friend who worked in social services and asked if they needed volunteers. They paired me with people going through divorces who suspected financial abuse but didn't know how to prove it. I showed them how to check for hidden accounts and unauthorized credit cards. I explained how to document everything and keep records the courts would accept. One woman started crying when I helped her find 3 credit cards her husband opened in her name. She thought she was going crazy when bills kept showing up. I told her exactly what to do and who to call. 6 months later, she sent me a card saying the judge ruled in her favor and her ex had to take all the fraudulent debt. Helping other people felt like taking something terrible that happened to me and turning it into something useful. 2 years after I first found my skincare cream missing, I met someone at a work conference who didn't know anything about my past. We started talking during a lunch break and ended up getting coffee after the sessions ended. He was funny and kind, and when I mentioned I was divorced, he just nodded and said he was too. We started dating slowly, just casual dinners and weekend hikes at first. The first time his mother made a comment about me being too independent, he shut it down immediately. He told her that he liked that about me, and if she couldn't be respectful, she could leave. I almost cried right there at the dinner table. His sister tried to guilt him about a family obligation once, and he simply said no without explaining or apologizing. Watching him set boundaries with his family showed me what I deserved all along. He never made me feel like I had to choose between him and my own peace. We moved in together after dating for a year, and his family accepted it without drama. The contrast to my marriage was so stark, it felt like living in a completely different world. Last month, I refinanced the house entirely in my name. I sat at the closing table signing papers and realized this was the final piece. The house was mine, the debt was handled, my credit was rebuilt, and I had a partner who actually respected me. I kept every single video file and document from the case in a fireproof safe. Sometimes I think about my ex and his mother and wonder if they learned anything. Then I remember it doesn't matter because they're not my problem anymore. I got justice through the courts, protected my assets through good legal help, and built a future doing exactly what I wanted. The people who never valued me are gone, and I'm better off without them.